Welcome to Athletes to Entrepreneurs, the Alumni Journey. I'm Rob Finkelstein, founder and CEO of Alumni Direct. We've created a platform to help people to network and connect through their affinity groups, their alumni groups, whether it be college alumni, it could be business alumni associations, it could be fraternities or sororities, or athletes. And we've created this show where we interview former collegiate and professional athletes and talk about their transition out of sports. And it's all about teaching, inspiring athletes that there is, in fact, life after sports. We're really excited today to have Juan Fernandez on. How you doing today?
Hey Rob, how you doing? Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. It's our pleasure. So Juan, he grew up in Argentina. So it's interesting. We've had a couple other athletes on the program that have been from other countries. And so growing up playing sports there, he went to Temple University and played college basketball there. And then next up on it was playing professional basketball in Europe for over 10 years. And now he's transitioning back here into the US and he's working on building a very successful coaching business. So we're going to talk. I always tell everybody, talk about playing sports growing up, and it might be a little bit different, but talk about how it shaped you in kind of getting your way up to ultimately college basketball.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, for me, it came from a family thing. My dad was a professional basketball player for 17 years, and so I literally was born the year that my dad played professionally, his rookie season, so the first time. So I was literally born in that world, and then um, it was a huge part of my life. It wasn't just an activity. It pretty quickly became part of my identity and who I grew up to be. Another thing I should say about sports is my brother too. My brother, he's a wheelchair athlete. He plays wheelchair tennis. And so through him, it was just a family of athletes overall. So I think sports totally shaped our relationships and who we are. The one difference growing up in Argentina from the US is that over there we have clubs sports, not so much in schools. So I didn't play in high school. I did play for a club and a team. So the structure is a little different, but obviously I would spend the entire day at the gym. I would go to school and then go to the gym and then go to sleep, eat if I had to, and then go back to the gym and spend just as much time as I could there. And it really shaped my personality. I think and I have two small children now, and so I encourage them to try, what they love and find their own passions. But I always try to push them a little bit towards team sports and just trying it out as they're young, because I do believe that it shapes. It just teaches values and qualities that are very useful then throughout your entire life, and so. That's what I try to do with my children from what I see that basketball gave me as I grew up,
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think a lot of the athletes and myself included, because I was a runner in high school and college. I definitely think, sports help shape that and that personality, that drive, just everything you have to do, the practice and the preparation. I'm sure a lot of sacrifices, like all of us had, where, when your friends might be doing one thing, you'd like to be with them, but you're out there, dedicated to your sport. So, what's I always ask this question, and you're probably I probably know the answer, but did you dream about being a professional athlete, growing up? And I'm assuming with your dad, that might have been something you were looking for.
Yeah, I definitely did. And really early on, I think if I think back, I think 12 or 13 when I realized that I wanted to do this for a living. And to me, it meant watching my dad meant, my thought was, okay, my dad is able to have a family, provide for his family, at through doing what he loves, which was playing basketball. And that to me seemed like a dream come true. And I was very young when I came to that realization. And I said, I really want this. Now looking back, I'm going to move forward a little bit. And sorry about this,
No,
Robert.
that's
We
okay.
can come back later. But I retired last year at 31 years old. Now that's probably very young for physically I could still play. Mentally, I came to a point where I was totally exhausted. I just had enough. And thinking back, the reflection I make is, okay, that coming to that realization at such a young age made me probably achieve that dream, because I took it too seriously too soon, and I did everything I could to get there. But that meant what you just said, missing family gatherings, or my friends going out and I had to stay because I had a game the next day. And I loved it back then. I think looking back, I wouldn't change a thing. But it did get to a point where it just took 100% of my mental energy for such a long time, and I couldn't find that balance. And it ended how it ended, and in a way, not how I planned it. But I think why I get into coaching after that, because I realized that there's a chance there to help other athletes come to this realization earlier than I did, and see that, ourselves more holistically. The truth is, the grind, it's so hard that you eat, breathe, sleep your sport. And I get that. I've been there. And so I think that it's possible to do both in a more balanced way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, and I think you hit something there that we talk a lot about is that holistic approach, which I think is great. I think that's what we're trying to do, that a little bit is trying to get into maybe the college athletic departments, maybe even high school, and to work with them to have that more holistic approach. So it does end up being, like you just said, I'm on the basketball player, and that's what I'm driven. That's all, I've got the blinders on, and I think a lot of these athletes have that, especially the ones that are more talented like yourself, that are able to take it to the next level and be a professional. So let's talk about, you played basketball at Temple University, but kind of interesting. How did you get to Temple from Argentina?
Yeah, it is interesting actually, because what I see now, this was wow, over 10 years ago. Time flies, really, when you don't stop and think about it. But in '08, in 2008, when I came to Philly for the first time, there wasn't much platform for us international athletes to show ourselves. Like, we really had to be found. I feel like there's more exposure now with a lot of incredible international players that have come this way. And so now the door is more open than it was back then. So I was lucky enough to, meet certain people along the way, that then one thing led to another. And then, it led to, for me being discovered. One of these people was Pepe Sanchez. Pepe Sanchez was a gold medalist with the Argentinian national team, and he played at Temple for Coach Cheney. Okay. And I was lucky enough to meet Pepe and tell him about what I aspired to, and he kind of helped me through that connection. And then the assistant coach at Temple, Matt Langle, who's now Colgate's head coach, he actually took a trip down to Argentina, to a small town where I'm from, literally 30,000 people. And it's just a funny anecdote that somebody from, the States at college would come down to my little town to watch me play. But that's how it started. And I was lucky. I think I was lucky to be found, but I also believe in energy very much. And I think that when you search for something relentlessly, things tend to align one way or another. And I think a little bit of both happened for me back then.
Yeah, that's great. I love, like, what you're saying too, the relentlessly. I mean, all these good nuggets for these athletes here. What you're talking about when you aspire to get something and truly going for it. So when you were at Temple, one of the things that we like to talk about is, and you kind of hit on it before with that kind of that holistic approach. When you were there, was there any type of, I guess, education, so to speak, of preparing athletes at Temple for life after sports?
Not specifically, in terms of, not in terms of that specifically. I think in my case, also coming from an international background, so I didn't grow up having this. It wasn't at my reach. It was, something I had to work for. I came really with an open mind, like a sponge, ready to take everything in. And so I remember we did have some meetings and stuff put together by the athletic department to kind of start networking and meeting people, also
Right.
alumni and stuff like that. And through that, I was able to see, some of these things that you mentioned. But I think college, most of all, it prepared. First of all, I always say it was my first step to becoming a man,
Right.
because I left my house for the first time. I was alone. It made me more independent, and it made me have to figure it out. It was like, we're gonna throw you in the middle of the ocean, and if you don't know how to swim, figure it out.
Yeah.
And that's really what it was. And it was a very uncomfortable initial few months for me. I remember it was even crying and missing home and everything. But as life went on, and now I think back to it, and it's when you're most uncomfortable when you grow.
Yeah.
That's the place of growth. And it's hard to see it then, but now that I reflect back with 15 years of career between college and it's like those are the moments that made me.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what college gave me. It was, finding myself or starting to discover who I was for the first time. And then on top of that, it's more so than journalism, which I studied. I graduated from broadcast journalism. More so than the knowledge of the career itself, it gave me the preparation to find a system that worked for me, to organize myself, to show that I could commit to being an athlete and a student at the same time. You don't do that just going through the motion. Like, you
Right.
have to put in the effort. And so being able to graduate and finish a 4-year career, I think that's what it showed afterwards to either coaches that looked at me to hire me as a basketball player, but even so after basketball, it's like, okay, what are those skills that you build over your, what did sports give you? We go back to the first question,
Right.
and it builds you. And I think as athletes, we tend to not see that or underestimate those things. And actually, it was during my transitions, one of the main things I always did was, okay, what are the possible downsides of this change, which they may happen or they may not, but I'd rather be aware of them.
Right.
And then, what are my transferable skills? What do I feel comfortable with? What am I good at other than just bouncing the ball around, And I think it's a powerful thing to do because you become more self-aware, more confident, and then the transition is, it's smoother.
Yeah, and honestly, I in all the most of the conversations I've had, like on this show or even with other athletes, you're definitely in the top percentage. You're in the top percentage of just having that understanding, awareness. Maybe like you brought up, it could be part of it too, just coming from another country and coming in here, and maybe there's things that athletes here take for granted, but that it does seem to be a running theme. A lot of times, it seems like athletes, they're so zoned in on their sport, which is great because I mean that's what they're doing, but they're not maybe necessarily looking at the bigger picture. And I think things have changed in colleges now too. It sounds great that it sounded like back then Temple was doing. I'm sure they're doing even more now from that, both on their perspective of the education side of it,
Yeah.
as well as the alumni side. So kind of switching gears to the alumni side, what did you see then as far as alumni engagement with the athletes? And maybe not just in basketball, could have been in the other sports as well, where they coming back and not just for like a golf tournament or things like that, but were they coming back and talking and mentoring and potentially offering jobs and things of that nature?
Yeah, I compare it to, well, there's one aspect from the alumni that I met that I compare to the professional life also in Europe. And it's just the passion, that people can have for a team or an organization that gave them so much, or that signified so much in their lives. And alumni is, it was the first time I saw how proud people are about their university, even years after graduating. So I think there's a lot of power in that. And then what I realized is that, and I'm seeing this now a lot too, as I start I start building my coaching journey, how helpful people are when you're trying to start something new.
Yeah.
And I think it's because they were also helped by others along their journey. And I think that's where alumni comes in. You know, I think there's nothing that you achieve in life that you achieve alone. There's always somewhere along the journey that has helped you in one way or another.
Right.
And those that come back and offer a hand or they stay involved, I think it has to do mostly because, you know, well, people helped me, let me give back, you know, let me do it for
Absolutely.
someone else. And everybody finds their own way to do that. I find coaching as a way to do that, you know, just
Right.
helping other athletes that are maybe in certain circumstances or situations that I found myself in the past. So how do you use those experiences and challenges in service of other people? And I think alumni is the same way.
Yeah.
And I was lucky enough to find a lot of great people that not only were so passionate about Temple and what the school represents to Philly and to in their own lives, but also to say, hey, you know, let me give you a hand because somebody helped me in the past. Let me give it back. And that was very. I played for Fran Dunphy when I was at Temple, and Fran and I, he's a great mentor for me. But we bumped heads a lot during college because you know he had a coaching style that was very, you know, that's hard to see when you're there. You know,
Right.
you're there and you're thinking, like, I think back and I said, well, this guy hates me. Why is he talking to me like that or treating me like that? I'm sure a lot of athletes go through that. And
Yeah.
it's only later on that you realize what he was doing. And he was building my character, making me stronger. And one of the things, the teachings that Fran always said to me was, to me and to the team, it's never about you. It's never about you. And he repeated that a million times during the 4 years that I was there. It's not about you. And I never truly grasped that idea until I left college and, you know, started seeing things from different perspectives and growing. And it has to do with this, you know, it's fulfillment, purpose, and whatever it is that we're doing here as athletes and beyond, it's not about you. And the sports world, I think Fran was so relentless in trying to teach us that, but because I think the sports world can lead an athlete to become more, you know, egocentric. You know, it is about you in many ways because
Sure.
people are watching you. You score, you win a game, you hit a game winner. It is about you. But in reality, it's not. And
Right.
once you come to that realization, um, I think you can really have an impact and make a difference. And it took me a while, but I think that's a big thing there. And I think it has to do with how alumni feels about this what you're saying. You know, it's not about you. It's let me try to do something for other people as well.
Yeah, it's important. I mean, that's kind of what gravitated me to this. I always say that you know, if I meet, I'm down here in South Florida, and if I meet a fellow Delaware alumni, it's always how can I help? And you kind of have that
Yeah.
camaraderie. Doesn't matter what age you are, you all have some of the stories on campus and places that are still common. So it's important for people to tap into that alumni network. And I think you know, more and more, you know, we've talked to even just talking to schools to try to get them to embrace it. Because I think sometimes once you're done playing the sport at the school and you kind of go into the whatever your next journey is, I think sometimes these athletes, and not just athletes, anybody in general, alumni might be forgotten. But when they get in that environment with fellow alumni, I think everybody's willing to help. So that's great. One of the hot topics today is NIL, name, image, likeness. And I always like to ask, kind of getting your perspective, because you were playing before it happened and now it is happening. So I want to get your perspective on what you think of it, both the positive and the negative sides of it.
Yeah, it's a delicate topic, and to be completely honest with you, I know to an extent, and I rather not know more
Right.
on certain things
Yeah.
and practices. It's definitely different than when I played, and I heard stories when I played that, you know, they didn't touch the students or my teammates or the people I was around with, but I know the talk, or some of the talk back then was, you know, it shouldn't be okay for students to get to the end of the month and maybe not have enough credits in their card, or, for us it was, I remember, diamond dollars or something.
Right.
And each school has their own stuff, not credits, enough credits to, buy or eat lunch or eat dinner, or that we couldn't accept somebody or a fan or an alumni back then offering to buy a slice of pizza for us, because that was against the rules. So back then, my opinion was, okay, I understand why this is, but let's try to find a balance that's common sense, that makes sense to all of us. The problem with everything is that I forget what the saying is, but once the rule is made or the law is made, there's always people who are gonna, abide by it, and there's always people who are gonna find a way around it. And I think that's where the problem is. It's not, it's always trying to be one step ahead. And it's not specifically about this now, the NIL now. It's with everything, really. Right. It's something new comes out. Okay, let me see how can I take it more advantage of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we go wrong. And that this is my opinion, right? But if we were all more ethical about how we do things, there would be no issues. Now, maybe that's a utopian world that I imagine, but that's how I like to operate. And so I think that's where the problem lies, not within the rules themselves or whatever it is that how we're going to do things, is how, in certain situations that you always find those that try to take advantage, and that's where things go south.
Yeah, and I think it, obviously will get better. I mean, I've talked to some athletes that, played a long time ago, and they wish they had it, obviously to like you said, I think there's a lot of challenges for athletes not being able to work and make money, so they're playing, and then like you said, how do you feed yourself? But I guess the one prevalent thing that's come up more, I think, is from an education side of it, is there needs to be more education on it, and there are companies and athletes and people trying to do it, because I think even to, like, from a financial literacy standpoint, and this, I always say, it's not just athletes, it's young people in general, but all of a sudden you got this windfall of money, and what do you do with it? By the way, hey, you have to pay taxes and things like that. I mean, I heard one story.
Oh, absolutely.
And what one story, somebody was saying, well, the athlete made so much money, and it wasn't a huge amount, but enough money to where they didn't qualify for their scholarship anymore, because they had this money that technically covered the scholarship, but they didn't know that, and then they were spending the money kind of, whether it's recklessly or whatever. I mean, they're, your kids having fun, and all of a sudden, no scholarship and no money either. So I think that's something that that everybody needs to work on.
Yeah, and I think the education part, it applies to this, but it also applies, well, one, beyond sports to other students. Yeah. And it also applies at a professional level, because, you see that too. You see that when, after being a pro, how many people that have made millions in their careers go bankrupt after retiring? And that shouldn't be the case. Yeah. And it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be the case. And I think it has to do with preparation, with education. And so it's just, I think that's the biggest part. And there's probably a big, aside from the NIL, I think there's a huge, opportunity there from an educational system standpoint to really touch on certain things that are not being touched on right now, that are going to help prepare kids for the real life, after school life, which is, and take it back to the sports. Let me tell you about my experience. When I went on to play professionally, I didn't have to pay for my rent. I didn't have to pay taxes because the team paid for it. Right. So as soon as I came out of that bubble, that protective bubble that, even unintentionally is protecting you for the real world in many ways, I didn't know how to file taxes. And, you know, in a way, it's embarrassing. You know, you feel it deep inside, and it's like, well, how can I not know? But then you think back, and it's like, well, you know, I didn't. And when you're protected in that bubble, you don't feel the need to get away and learn these things. And so it's needed. You know,
Yeah.
it's very much needed. And this is just an example of, you know, how do I pay my bills, water and electricity? I
Yeah,
don't know. I
no,
never had to do it. You
yeah,
know?
you're right. I mean, and you're right. It goes obviously goes beyond athletes, just young people in general that aren't exposed to that. So there's definitely a need for more education. So now let's switch over and just kind of talk about. So you had two transitions. So we're going to talk about the transition from college to being a professional athlete, and then on the back end we'll talk about your transition from being a professional athlete to what you're doing today.
Yeah, yeah. So, um, I mean, to me, the first transition, which was college to pro, was search. I really aspired to do that, and I focused a lot of my energy on that. And I found myself a lot more prepared going from college to Europe than I was going from Argentina to college, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think 4 years in college gave me a lot of preparation for that on many of the aspects that I was mentioning before. Nonetheless, it's a big change, and you soon start to realize that when you get paid for doing, for playing basketball, there's added pressures that you may not have had in college, you know, in all honesty. Yeah, you have to win and perform and whatnot, but it's just a different world. And I think there's an opportunity to help athletes, college athletes who are about or are making it into the pros, to prepare for that as well, to avoid some of the obstacles or the walls that can, show up in front of your face very quickly. Um, and then the second
Oh, before
transition,
before you
yeah,
leave that, like,
yeah,
just give some because you started talking a little bit. Give some quick advice to athletes that are, like you just said, that are going from college to professional.
yeah, absolutely. I think in a way you have to understand that what I just said is that now it's going to become a job and you're being paid to perform.
Okay.
And so just being aware of that can help you prepare um, in advance to know that it's going to happen. Now, what I've seen in my career is also that foreign players, for example, in Europe, when I went to play in Europe, um, you could only have a limited amount of foreign players in your roster. So Americans, most of
Right.
all. That means that because they're limited spots, they usually hire players who can really play good and perform at a high level. Now that comes with added responsibility. And Americans, what I saw was there was more pressure than other players because, they're paying you good money and they're bringing you to perform and help us win. So I think if you come from a foreign, like playing as an international player professionally, you have to understand that that's going to happen.
Right.
Now, some of the things that I could tell athletes that are coming, and I wrote about this. I'm very active on social media since I retired, and I try to, share what I know and what I found throughout my career. And it's, um, you also have to be aware that, it can be lonely, but it doesn't have to be. So I would encourage those athletes that are going out there to really find genuine connections, because the truth is that a lot of people are going to praise you, and when you win, they're going to love you, and when you lose, those same people are not going to be there for you, and that's going to happen, and it's normal. I would say don't take it personally. It's not about that. But if you can find genuine connections, like maybe it's one or two teammates, or maybe it's people that you made relationships with, and just staying in touch with that close circle, that can make a difference. And then I would do research on where it is that I'm going, like talk to maybe other other players that have played there that you know, or people in that area, research the city or the town. In reality, the environment you put yourself into is way more important than the money you're going to make. So this is my opinion, and this was the way I did my career is I'd rather make, $10,000 less, but put myself in a good environment and a positive situation, than just go for the money and maybe be miserable because I'm not surrounding by the right people, or the team, they may not be on time with payments or whatnot. There's a whole, list of things that could happen. And so, yeah, those are the most important things I would say to athletes who are about to go pro.
Okay, no, that was great. And so now, take us fast forward to, you played a great career in Europe, and now you came back to the U.S. and talk about that transition of no longer being in that sport.
Yeah, so what I told you before, that's where I did this exercise of, okay, well, first of all, it was a little unexpected because I came to a point where I couldn't keep going mentally. So it was, burnout, and all right, let's move on. But what I did do was, okay, let me see what are the potential downsides of this and where am I going to go. And so from a personal standpoint, it was okay. I spent 10 plus years playing basketball professionally, but in reality, I started playing when I was 6. So it was 26 years of playing basketball.
Long time.
Yeah, and doing nothing else, really. And that's the first thought that I feel like most athletes deal with when the end of the career comes is, who am I really beyond my sport? And it's not until you get into that after sports world that you start seeing what you're capable of. But it's scary before that. And like I said, it's only during those really, really uncomfortable periods that you grow, but it's hard to see it at the moment because, it's challenging and it's difficult to navigate that. So to me, it was, okay, what are, a possible obstacle will be an identity crisis. Who am I after basketball? Who am I beyond basketball? What can I do? Another one was lack of experience outside of that industry. If I were to go in the corporate world or be an entrepreneur, I didn't have experience. And so, I made a list of these things that could be potential obstacles. But then I focused on, okay, what are the skills I have beyond the game? What have I learned? What are my transferable skills? And that's when you start finding that, I was captain of my team one year. Okay, that taught me a lot about leadership and how to, get into tough conversations with people, with teammates, with coaches that were, difficult to have, but you had to do it. How to deal with the high stakes performance situation, playing in front of 10,000 people, not only with you when you're playing home, but against you when you're playing away. And so I think that builds your character too. And we take many of these things for granted because it's what we know how to do. It's what we do, and we do it for so long. But I think you have to stop and reflect on that and realize how capable you are beyond, because you're going to see it. As an athlete, you're going to see it once you get into that environment. But you can't let those limiting beliefs stop you from getting into that environment. And I think this simple exercise, could help a lot during a trend. I know it helped me, and so it can help a lot for athletes who are nearing their retirement and thinking about what they want to do. And the last thing I would say is, yeah, the sport is going to take a huge chunk of your time, but take time daily to explore other passions. That is a key. You have to find out what you like to do beyond playing your sport. And if you can start uncovering that, unraveling that early on, you will see that it's going to clear your path much better when the time comes to do something else.
Well, I know you're going to be a great coach because you're giving great advice. It's
Thank you.
You're welcome. It's a common theme, and I think I've heard recently, one of the more recent podcasts was, somebody said the same thing, just talked about passion, just, find out what you're passionate about and kind of, you know, go for that. And then also, you touched on the whole skill set thing. I think one guy that we had on, he's played college football. When it was over, like he was already prepared and knowing he was going into the real world, but ultimately he worked his way up and he was a successful CEO for some large companies. And the one thing he implored, kind of like you're saying too with athletes, is you have such a skill set that can be utilized that companies want, or even as an entrepreneur, that drive, the practice, preparation, everything we talk about, the leadership skills, being a teammate. There's so many things that athletes probably maybe they take for granted, and not all of them, because you're a perfect example of realizing that. But I think more athletes need to do that and need to understand what they have. So talk now I always talk about, kind of joke around with the corporate commercial, so to speak. Talk about what you're doing today now, and you're passionate about coaching, and obviously all this advice you're giving is fantastic, and I'm sure that's going to be part of your practice. So talk a little bit about what you're doing and how people can find you.
Yeah, so the way I got into this coaching, and it's life coaching as a whole, like the entire picture, but then you focus on transitions and people dealing with changes and stuff like that. It all started when I burnt out of my career, and I said, okay, once I got through that, it's like, how can I put these challenges to good use? How can I make this useful in service of other athletes whom I know that they're dealing with some of the things that I dealt with, because they told me. When I retired mid-season and I had found the courage to say, hey, I'm going to put a stop to this because it's really affecting my mental health, a lot of my own teammates and athletes I played against came up to me and said, wow, Juan, some of the things you're going through, I'm going through too, but we all find our own way to deal with them. And so that sparked, something inside me. And I said, how can I help you? How can I do something about it? And so I came across a certification to become a certified life coach. And as I explore that possibility, I realized that this practice would give me the resource and the tools I needed, the frameworks to make that vision a reality. So I added the two, and this is what came out, my coaching business. And, the one thing I will say is, we were talking about finding your passions. And I always had a passion for, first of all, learning new things, and always feel like I'm growing, just expanding whatever it is that my knowledge is. But I also find a passion in talking to people and helping them and find fulfillment. And so I feel like, Coach, I always say, I heard a great mentor of mine say, if your passion is for you, your purpose is for others. And so
Great.
I found this passion that aligned with a purpose, because through coaching, which is something I love, I'm able to do it in service of other people and help them through their own struggles and challenges. So it really made sense to me when I stopped playing. And the last 3 months before retirement were really rough. We're leading up to that moment where I said enough. And I felt like I had fallen out of love with the sport and the routine and the professionalism of it all. It can be, it can do that to you. And so my first goal when I stopped playing was, let me find something that will make me wake up energized and motivated and really ready to tackle whatever it is that the day brings again. And like basketball was at one point for me. And I found that in coaching again. This was about a year after I retired. So, just to let people know, it takes time and patience, but I do encourage everybody I come across with to be on that search, because I feel like that's the only way to do it. That's the only way to move forward and feel like you're fulfilled. Whatever, you got to find whatever that is that makes you feel alive.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. And I think it seems like you're well ahead of the curve on a lot of, people that I've spoken with. And I think that there's just some great advice. And I love all this with we're
Mm.
talking about the passion and just, kind of encouraging others. Just look at ways that I like that whole thing too with the purpose. That's good. So how do people find you?
Yeah, so I'm very active on LinkedIn. You can find me just my name, Juan Fernandez, on LinkedIn. I'm very active also on Instagram, and then I have my website is Juan JUAN M Fernandez.com. So people can also see what I'm doing there. But yeah, I'm really, really open to talking to people, reaching out, even if it is like just get on a conversation. And that's how I feel most of my days. That's how we met, Rob,
Yeah,
actually. So
absolutely.
I love doing that. So yeah, I encourage anybody who comes across my stuff to reach out and just talk, you know.
Yeah, no, and we'll put all that in the show notes. And to find us, you can find us at alumnidirect.com, and you can also find us on Facebook and LinkedIn, Instagram, and follow the show. I mean, this has been a fantastic show, and we want more athletes to just soak it all in, because I think there's so many issues today with athletes transitioning out of sports, whether it's on the mental side or whether it's financial literacy, and we want to make a difference. And I think in interviewing these athletes, and Juan's a perfect example, just teaching people what they can do. So thank you again so much, Juan. It's been great.
Oh, thank you, and congratulations. I think what you guys are doing is great, and we share a mission in a way, and so hopefully a lot of athletes and people out there can benefit from listening to the show and just keep up the good work. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.